After weeks of conflict, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has said that military operations in northern Tigray region have been completed. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed declared victory in Tigray region after 3 weeks of intense fighting that has left thousands dead. Ethiopian Prime Minister took to Twitter to share the news of the completion of the military operation. The announcement came shortly after he confirmed that federal troops had seized control of the regional capital of Mekelle and would continue searching for and detaining quote-unquote TPLF criminals. The Prime Minister has called the offensive a law and order operation. Chief of Staff for the Ethiopian National Defense Force made the announcement via the state broadcaster, saying that the army had taken control of the capital of the Tigray region.
ሰራዊታችን በትላንትና ዕለት ዝግጅት ሲያደርግ ቆይቶ ለመቀሌ ከተማ ህዝብ እንዴት ተጓዳኝ ጉዳት ሳይደርስበት መቀሌ ከተማን መቆጣጠር ይቻላል የሚል ዝግጅት ሲያደርግ ቆይቶ ዛሬ ከሰዓት በኋላ መቀሌን ሙሉ ለሙሉ ተቆጣጥሯል። ሰራዊታችን አሁን መቀሌን ሙሉ በሙሉ ከተቆጣጠረ በኋላ በየጉርጓዱ በየጎሬው የተደበቁትን ጸረ ሰላም ኃይሎች ያደነ እየተከታተለ እየፈለገ ይገኛል።
The announcement came after heavy shelling was reported in Mekelle as it braced for a military offensive against Tigray's ruling party. However, the leader of Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, whose forces have been fighting Ethiopian troops, said the group was not giving up. It was not clear if any TPLF leaders had surrendered. Meanwhile, the chief of the United Nations Refugee Agency said on Saturday that Tigrayan refugees arriving in Sudan fear inter-communal violence in the Tigray region, where a 3-week conflict has sent thousands across the border. United Nations has raised concern for the thousands of Eritrean refugees caught in the crossfire of the violence in Ethiopia and appealed to the Ethiopian government to exercise maximum responsibility.
Without access, it's difficult to have information and to inform the refugees here, to help them inform. And even for them, it's difficult with the lack of communication. So it's not an easy time to make that assessment. Here, we concentrate on supporting the refugees. In Ethiopia, really, my biggest concern as UNHCR at the moment is the Eritrean refugees. Almost 100,000 without this daily support that we were providing. I visited myself those camps a couple of years back. And with the additional risk there of some violence, we hear reports, we have no confirmation, but I really want to appeal to the Ethiopian government for exercising maximum responsibility.
Over 43,000 refugees have fled Ethiopia and have taken shelter in the neighboring state of Sudan. The United Nations body is currently trying to provide humanitarian aid and emergency relief to help the Sudanese government manage this refugee crisis. The conflict is rooted in long-standing tension between the TPLF, the powerful regional party, and the central government. TPLF have argued that the central government has marginalized the Tigrayans since coming into power. We are now being joined by William Davison. He's a senior analyst for International Crisis Group and he's joining us from Cambridge. William, I would like to welcome you to WION. Now, the Ethiopian government claims that it has taken control of the capital of the Tigray region and that the conflict is over. Ethiopian government also claims that it was simply an internal law and order situation, law and order issue. They rejected talks as far as the offer was concerned. It came from African Union leaders. The conflict in Tigray appears to have ended. But what kind of an internal law and order problem is this that has resulted in the deaths of thousands of people?
Well, clearly what's happened is that, this law enforcement operation has been prosecuted using military means. And that's why it's led to such suffering. Although we should be clear because of the telecommunications blackout across the region and generally the lack of any sort of form really of independent information coming out. We do not know, for example, we do not even have an estimate for the death toll in this conflict. So there is a lot to be known, but we do know it has been a very full-scale military intervention. The reason that this has been so serious is because Tigray regional government has quite a significant security force. And so at the point when the federal government said that Tigray's government was unlawful, and that was because they went ahead and ran an election in defiance of federal authority, that really set up a clash between two fairly significant forces. We can see, obviously, that the federal forces in this initial phase of the conflict have taken a lot of territory, including the major cities, finishing with the regional capital. But we have not seen the capture of the Tigrayan leadership. We do not know the state of the remnants of the Tigrayan forces, but there is certainly potential for some form of continued resistance in the form of an insurgency. And we also have to see to what extent the federal government's attempts to set up a provisional government, to what extent they will be welcomed by the broader Tigrayan society, because that could also be a cause of instability and possibly support for any insurgency that now emerges.
Right. Like you were mentioning, from early November, there has been a virtual blackout in the Tigray region. No information is coming out, but agencies have reported that thousands are dead. What we know is that 44,000 people have fled across the border into Sudan. There's a humanitarian crisis, not just in Tigray region, but in Sudan as well, where refugee camps are already overcrowded.
Yeah, so what's happened there is primarily in West Tigray, and this was mentioned in your report about intercommunal violence. And this really speaks to the fact that although this phase of the military operation, certainly to take control of the regional government, has been successful on its own terms, there may well be lingering serious political problems and instability. What I'm referring to is that in West Tigray, factions from Amhara, the region bordering to the south of Tigray, they have essentially moved in and reclaimed territory from Tigray that they say was historically Amhara. This is what explains the reports of intercommunal violence there to some extent. And this presents a lingering and serious political problem, as it's very unlikely that the TPLF, Tigrayan nationalists and Tigrayans more generally will accept their territory being taken over. So that's why the refugees primarily have fled because of this intervention. And for those political reasons, there is a threat of ongoing instability in West Tigray particularly, but also in other parts of Tigray, as I have described.
One final question to you. United Nations has asked for immediate and unimpeded access for aid to the Tigray region. Do we see that happening?
Well, like most things here, be entirely dependent on the course of the conflict or on the course of the post-conflict situation. If there is a concerted and fairly sort of widespread insurgency that develops, and if it has the support of a certain amount of civilian population, it will be difficult for the government, given its military objectives here, to allow unimpeded access to aid. However, if the civilian population essentially goes along with the imposition of a provisional government, and if there is no strong insurgency that emerges here, then the federal government will be allowed to access to aid agencies in the areas that it controls. So we will have to see how the conflict and the political situation plays out. That will affect how serious the humanitarian crisis is as this situation develops.
William Davison from International Crisis Group, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your perspective and insight into the conflict in Tigray.